Good morning, distinguished speakers, attendees, colleagues. On behalf of Pathways to Peace, it is an honor to welcome you today for our side event, Promoting Global Security, the Intersection of Peace Building and Nuclear Disarmament during the NPT Review Conference. My name is Rinor, Jani, and I serve as the Director of Nuclear Disarmament Advocacy and Research in our organization, and I am the moderator for this timely discussion. We convene at a moment of heightened uncertainty and nuclear risk. Across multiple regions, geopolitical tensions are intensifying, and the role of nuclear weapons in national security have resulted in armed conflict. The war in Ukraine has reintroduced nuclear rhetoric into global discourse, raising serious concerns about escalation, miscalculation, and the normalization of nuclear threats. The current conflict in Iran has also shown how nuclear weapons can become the cause of war and its ability to impact regional and global security dynamics. For decades, global security has been anchored in nuclear deterrence-based frameworks that are rooted in the belief that nuclear weapons prevent war through the threat of catastrophic retaliation. Yet, history has constantly shown that this assumption is not sustainable. Near misses, technical failures, and human misjudgments have brought the world dangerously close to nuclear catastrophe multiple times. This is why the intersection of peace building and nuclear disarmament is so critical. Peace building challenges us to redefine security and the ability to sustain peace. It addresses the root causes of conflict, including inequality, mistrust, and political instability, rather than relying on the threat of overwhelming force. Applying a peace-building perspective to nuclear disarmament enables us to move beyond managing risk and towards eliminating it. It calls for building systems of trust, accountability, and shared security that render nuclear weapons obsolete. At the center of global disarmament are two key instruments: the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. The NPT has long served as a cornerstone of global efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, promote peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and advance disarmament. However, more than 50 years after its entry into force, progress on disarmament remains unbalanced. The continued modernization of nuclear arsenals, the persistence of deterrence policies, and the ongoing nuclear arms race have contributed to global nuclear tensions. Article 6 of the NPT commits all states parties to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to nuclear disarmament and to the conclusion of the nuclear arms race. This is a legally binding obligation and a cornerstone of the NPT's legitimacy. The TPNW can be understood as a concrete expression of this obligation by establishing a comprehensive prohibition on the production, possession, use, and threat of nuclear weapons. The TPNW implements the disarmament commitment outlined in Article 6 of the NPT as a legal framework. Rather than existing in opposition, the TPNW and NPT are mutually reinforcing. The NPT provides the foundational commitment to disarmament, while the TPNW advances its implementation by presenting a clear prohibition and establishes a new international norm that says nuclear weapons are illegal. In this sense, the TPNW represents the implementation of the disarmament obligations of the NPT. Together, these instruments form a legal and moral pathway toward a nuclear weapon-free world when it's combined with political will from states. Advocacy and discussions on nuclear disarmament must center the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused immediate devastation, followed by decades of suffering from radiation exposure, cancer, intergenerational health effects, and environmental destruction. These impacts continue to be felt today across multiple generations. In recent weeks, I've had the honor of engaging with atomic bomb survivors and survivor-based organizations advocating for disarmament. Their testimonies are powerful reminders that there are real human lives behind every policy debate. Their message is clear: nuclear weapons must be abolished. They have also reminded me that the role of youth is equally critical to nuclear disarmament. Young people are not only the leaders of tomorrow, but they also have an important role in building peace and a world that is free of nuclear weapons. This is clearly recognized in multiple international policy frameworks and UN resolutions. United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250 marked a historic shift by acknowledging the positive role of youth and maintaining and promoting international peace and security, and calling for their meaningful inclusion in decision-making processes. Within the disarmament sphere, UN General Assembly Resolution 7464 and 7645 encourages the meaningful and inclusive participation of youth in disarmament efforts while emphasizing education, capacity building, and awareness raising. They also further strengthen the global commitment to youth engagement by calling for expanded opportunities for youth to contribute to disarmament discussions and decision-making processes. Together, these frameworks establish that positive perspectives are important in confronting the existential crisis that nuclear weapons pose. I have learned about 5 peace-building solutions that can advance nuclear disarmament, such as, first, disarmament education. Expanding access to nuclear disarmament education prepares young people with the knowledge and tools needed to challenge deterrence-based narratives and advocacy for change. Education allows for critical thinking and builds a culture of peace. Second, financial divestment. Encouraging institutions such as universities, pension funds, banks, corporations, and financial stakeholders to divest from companies involved in nuclear weapons production can shift the economic incentives that sustain these arsenals. Third, humanitarian-based advocacy. Centering the lived experiences of those affected by nuclear weapons, such as atomic bomb survivors and other nuclear survivors, strengthen the moral and political case for disarmament. It allows for the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons to be understood in a practical sense and grounds the abstract concepts into human realities. Fourth, strengthening multilateralism. Reinforcing frameworks such as the NPT and the TPNW is essential. This includes promoting universalization, ensuring compliance, and fostering dialogue among states with different perspectives. Fifth, building trust. At its core, nuclear deterrence reflects a lack of trust between states. Peace-building measures such as confidence-building initiatives, arms control agreements, disarmament instruments, and sustained diplomatic cooperation are important for nuclear risk reduction and minimizing tensions. Achieving a world free of nuclear weapons is complex. It requires political courage, sustained advocacy, and a willingness to challenge deeply entrenched security frameworks. History has demonstrated that international norms can evolve, that weapons can be stigmatized and eliminated. Most importantly, it is collective action that can create transformative change. As we engage in today's discussion, I encourage all of us to reflect on how peace-building approaches can be more deeply integrated into disarmament efforts, how we can bridge divides and build consensus, and how we can translate commitments into concrete action. The future of global security and the future of humanity depends on the choices we make today. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to a meaningful discussion. So now I would like to introduce Mr. Anton Wen. He is the head of unit for nuclear weapons at the Austrian Ministry for Foreign Affairs. His portfolio covers the NPT, the TPNW, CTBTO, and the IAEA files. Councillor Wen Wisloki is the co-coordinator of the TPNW Working Group on Universalization alongside colleagues from New Zealand and Uruguay. Before joining the Department for Disarmament Issues, Anton was dealing with multilateral climate, energy, and environmental diplomacy at the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and earlier he was posted to the Austrian Permanent Mission to the UN in New York and Vienna, covering human rights issues. Anton holds a Master of International Relations from Sciences Po Paris and MGIMO University. Anton, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rinor, and thank you for putting this panel together. Good morning, dear colleagues, dear students. It's an honor to speak on this panel. Let me start by underlining that in the realm of multilateral disarmament, we very much value the cooperation with civil society organizations. And indeed, since this meeting happens in the margins of the NPT RevCon, I want to stress that from our perspective, if there are any future potential adjustments to the working methods of the NPT RevCons, we should definitely strengthen the role of the civil society and academia in the NPT review process. In reference to the title of this event, Promoting Global Security, the intersection of peace building and disarmament, but also having in mind last week's statement by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and I quote, "Hard-won norms are eroding, arms control is dying. Have we forgotten that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought? Have we forgotten that nuclear weapons make no one safer?" So having this in mind, let me present some notions how Austria, through its engagement in multilateral nuclear disarmament, addresses this urgent need to, as you rightly pointed out already in your introductory remarks, Rinor, to reinvigorate the spirit of the NPT and in particular the disarmament obligation under Article 6. So I will first spare a few words of what we believe should be immediate steps by the nuclear weapon states to reduce the risk of nuclear escalation. You already spoke about the confidence building measures. And then in a second part of my intervention, I will elaborate on how Austria jointly with other non-nuclear weapon states have advocated for even more concrete steps to outlaw the nuclear weapons. So I will speak about our engagement under the TPNW. So first, with the expiration of the New START Treaty on February 5th, for the first time in over 5 decades, the arsenals of the United States and the Russian Federation are without legally binding constraints. And in that sense, it can really be very much hoped and pushed for that the proposal by the United States that is now supported also by France and the UK to engage in a multilateral strategic stability dialogue among all 5 all 5 nuclear weapon states will materialize. And history tells us that arms control negotiations are a lengthy process. They are not always linear. There are setbacks and there are missed opportunities, but they are an important process and it deserves the political commitment and also the necessary personnel and the personal resources of nuclear weapon states to engage with this. And I heard some comments from a former negotiator of one of the P5 countries that during the Cold War period there were strategic stability talks actually happening more frequently between the US and the Soviet Union than it is the case nowadays. So we have had a period of the Cold War where there were constantly some kind of talks, and now we have a period where there is actually very rarely we see the headlines of some discussions. We have witnessed multiple national interventions at this NPT RevCon that have shown that there is really an expectation that the majority of the states expect the P5 to engage in a strategic dialogue on arms control. And because this is actually a measure to provide much needed transparency about their capabilities, arsenals, and doctrines. There is also a clear expectation of a recommitment to the P5 statement from January 2022. And as I said, this is not only a confidence building measure from our perspective between the nuclear weapon states, but more importantly, a much expected message about lowering the risks of nuclear escalation towards the non-nuclear weapon states. And actually, if such a structured dialogue happens between the P5, from our perspective, it should also allow for meaningful engagement by non-nuclear weapon states. And because this is in the end in the interest of all states and the security of all peoples, that those nuclear weapons are never used again. The nuclear taboo is eroding. So what I just mentioned above in terms of steps of de-escalation, risk reduction, and confidence between the nuclear weapon states in a bilateral or ideally plurilateral way needs also to be accompanied by a commitment by all state parties to the multilateral nuclear disarmament regime. And we hope that the NPT Review Conference will come up with such a strong commitment. But equally, a strong commitment to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Now, on the role of the Treaty on the Prohibitions of Nuclear Weapons and the role it plays in highlighting the security concerns of non-nuclear weapon states in relation to the persistent reliance on nuclear weapons by some states. So I don't want to lecture too much on the history of the elaboration of the TPNW. Let me just briefly mention a few key moments: the 3 conferences on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons in Norway, Mexico, and Austria, 2013 and 14. The humanitarian pledge that was a result of the conference in Vienna in 2014, backed by 120 states, through which a commitment was reached to pursue negotiations on a ban treaty. And finally, then, the negotiations that concluded with the adoption of the TPNW in July 2017, and then the entry into force in 2021. And actually, today, we have a majority of member states of the UN who support the treaty. So has the treaty been successful in achieving nuclear disarmament? Well, nuclear weapon states argue against, because they say no nuclear weapon state is actually a state party to the treaty, unlike the NPT. So discussions on disarmament can only comprehensively take place from their perspective under the NPT. But what we believe is clear is that the TPNW has achieved a shift in the dynamics. The TPNW has increased pressure on nuclear weapon states. And it did so through the establishment of an international norm, so the support by a growing community of states to the ban, but also through the engagement of civil society in many states. And this civil society has engaged because of the testimonies of survivors, because of the sheer interest in, peace building, as you explained, because of educational initiatives. And I think one organization that really needs to be mentioned here is ICANN, and the TPNW owns a lot to ICANN. Now, on the security concerns of the non-nuclear weapon states as developed under the TPNW, you're hearing this often from Austrian diplomats, the security concerns report. What is it really about? I will try now to explain. So let's start with a simple observation. For decades, the global discussion on nuclear weapons have been dominated by those who possess them or claim security through them. Well, what we wanted to emphasize is that the risks created by nuclear weapons are actually borne by everyone, so they should be discussed by everyone. And so this asymmetry between those who decide and those who are exposed lies at the heart of the discussion about the security concern. And it is actually this imbalance that the TPNW, and in particular the security concerns process, seek to address. So we know from science that any use of nuclear weapons would have catastrophic humanitarian consequences. They would be immediate, long-term, local, and global. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives lost. There is no such thing as a localized nuclear war. There will be a long-lasting environmental damage. There will be severe impacts on food systems, health, economies, the development across borders and generation. And as I said, those are not hypothetical concerns, but they are well documented, scientifically grounded, and widely acknowledged. And the General Assembly member states will hear more about these scientific findings when the independent panel on the effects of nuclear war will present its report next year to the General Assembly. actually a report that updates a quite old study about the effects of nuclear war from the 80s. The effects of the humanitarian consequences and the effects of a nuclear weapons use, they do not stop at borders, they do not respect alliances, and they do not spare those without a say in the decisions that led to their use. And against this backdrop of having a debate about security concerns with those who are the victims of the use, but they cannot really decide on it, the security concerns process set up intergovernmental but multi-stakeholder process under the TPNW, a little bit lengthy, but it emerged with a report that you can find online. I can also then later for the organizers share the link. And then it emerged with a clear concerns among these TPNW state parties that we have the treaty's humanitarian rationale, and this is widely recognized, but the security rationale is actually needs to be further developed. It was often misunderstood or dismissed because, and you see this with the salience of nuclear weapons in security conversations in many countries, not only in Europe, by the way, that critiques would say, yes, nuclear weapons are terrible, but they keep us safe. And the security concerns process was mandated to actually respond directly to this claim. So there is evidence-based. It was evidence-based, inclusive, and grounded in live security realities. And it was actually a challenge to the fact that for a long time we had a small group of states and experts and institutions defining what counts as real security. So we had intensive discussions for around 1 year. We were briefed by leading scientists and academics. And the result was a report by the TPNW states for the TPNW state parties to help them to articulate their own security concerns in their own terms. And this is not a rejection of the term in national security, it is really an expansion of it. And the findings are clear, and there are 3 points I want to mention here. First, we laid out the common factual basis, so the humanitarian consequences and the environmental consequences. I already spoken at length about it. Second, we articulated the risks of nuclear weapons as being real and increasing. So we have the heightened geopolitical tensions, we have an erosion of arms control, and destabilizing technologies, AI, that are increasing the likelihood of miscalculation or escalation. And we have included into this report research that shows that an escalation dynamics involving so-called tactical nuclear weapons would actually nearly inevitably spiral into a full-scale nuclear war. And then we addressed the notion of nuclear deterrence. So we challenged the assumption of this theory. Nuclear deterrence is often presented as a proven guarantee of peace, but in reality, it's a psychological construct built on the assumptions of rationality, predictability, and restraint. But you already pointed out to that fact, Rinor, that history tells us a different story. There were near misses, there were technical failures, there were misinterpretations, and sometimes it was just sheer luck that prevented a catastrophe. The third point that we elaborated in the security concerns report was that parties states that are not party to the nuclear planning or targeting, they have nothing that provides security to them through nuclear deterrence. So deterrence offers actually no reassurances at all to them. They are simply asked to accept that there is little transparency, there is no accountability, and there are the consequences of the catastrophic. They are the effects of the catastrophic consequences, and all this is a byproduct of someone else's security doctrine. So, to conclude this, the security concerns report and the security concerns approach was really to legitimize the security perspectives of the global majority of non-nuclear weapon states, to reframe nuclear weapons as a source of shared risk, not of exclusive protection, and it also opens actually the avenue to bring these arguments into other forums about security, discussions, health, development. And what we believe is fundamentally that when the consequences are potentially existential, policy or security policy must be guided by evidence of what can go wrong and by responsibility to prevent it. So that is actually the security rationale of the TPNW. And let me stop here, and then I'm looking forward to engage into discussion with the panel and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anton, for your remarks. Excellent remarks that really talked about, from a member state perspective, in terms of the negotiations and the process, and especially highlighting the TPNW, which is really important. Now I'd like to introduce Ms. Mariana Fernandez. Mariana is a project manager at the New York office of the Rosa Luxembourg Foundation, where she works on issues related to disarmament, peace, and anti-militarism. Her work focuses on strengthening international dialogue, supporting civil society initiatives, and advancing critical perspectives on global security and militarization. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank you for inviting me and for organizing this. I wanna start with something that I think most people in this room will agree with, is that we need a fundamental reorientation on how this review conference understands the relationship between peace building and nuclear risk reduction. Because the framework we are operating under is not working at all. Deterrence, that is, still presented in so many official forums as this stabilizing logic, rests on assumptions that they are not holding anymore. Rational actors, perfect information, a stable political environment, none of these can be guaranteed today. I will argue were never guaranteed, but especially if we look at the geopolitical tensions today. And in this context, this current context of geopolitical fragmentation, renewed arms competition, really the casual invocation of nuclear threats in political discourse, as we have seen recently, the risks are not abstracts. And more importantly, deterrence, as I think it was already mentioned, does not eliminate nuclear danger. It manages, it's distributed, and it does so unequally, placing the heaviest burdens on communities and regions with the least voice in shaping these decisions. So the existing framework is not adequate to the moment we are living in. And this is where I think peace building comes in. Because peace building, unlike deterrence, is a disarmament strategy. Because what peace building can offer and deterrence cannot is this shift in focus from managing the threats to transforming the political conditions that generate those threats. And central to that shift is a change in who is allowed to shape policy. Nuclear policy, we know, has long been conducted in technical and strategic terms, with language that creates a distance between decisions and their human consequences. That distance is a political choice. There's nothing neutral in that. When we speak of deterrence stability, escalation management, we are choosing abstraction over the lived realities of communities that have absorbed the cost of nuclear systems for decades. Through testing, through occupation, through really the permanent anxiety of living under nuclear threats. The humanitarian evidence is unequivocal. It was already mentioned here by my colleague. Any use of nuclear weapons will produce catastrophic transboundary effects that no state and no international system could manage. Insisting on that evidence, talking about it, keeping it at the center of every conversation, has nothing to do with sentimentality. It's the honest foundation for policy. And it directly challenges the legitimacy of deterrence as a permanent security framework. So in practice for us, peace building as a disarmament strategy means three things. First, investing in regional dialogue and trust building, because sustainable disarmament cannot be imposed from the outside. It must emerge from processes that take the legitimate security concerns of all actors seriously, including those who are routinely excluded from formal negotiations. Second, it means treating demilitarization as a political project, because nuclear weapons do not exist in isolation. They are embedded between wider systems of militarism, and addressing nuclear risk means confronting those systems directly. And third, and this is non-negotiable, justice and historical accountability. Communities affected by nuclear testing, by nuclear threats, have knowledge and understanding that policy processes have consistently ignored. Peacebuilding demands their inclusion. As a condition of legitimacy, this is not a question of being of courtesy. This is about creating legitimacy for the process. So to make this a bit more concrete about what at the Rosa Luxembourg Foundation we do in relation to this, I'm going to talk. We work very closely. I'm going to talk about the work that we do with the civil society organization that is called the Middle East Treaty Organization, or META, which is an organization that advocates for the creation of a weapons of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East. For those who don't know, this is an initiative, an idea that has decades of international recognition, and it has been repeatedly endorsed by the NPT. And the NPT has actually created a mandate to discuss it at the conference that happened every November since 2019. The thing is, progress has been consistently and systematically stalled. What is often missed is that a WMD-free zone is not primarily or only a technical disarmament mechanism. It is a peacebuilding project. Its realization requires working through deeply rooted regional tensions, asymmetric power arrangements, and unresolved questions of sovereignty and security. You cannot separate the disarmament goal from the political conditions that surround them. They are part of the same problem. What METO insists upon is that disarmament and political settlement belong in the same conversation. That nuclear risk in the Middle East cannot be addressed while the region's most fundamental conflicts remain frozen. Through our joint work, we have facilitated dialogue among diplomats, civil society actors, researchers, and policy practitioners from across the region and beyond. And what consistently emerges from those conversations is a genuine, broad recognition that security cannot be achieved through military superiority or nuclear ambiguity. What is needed are cooperative, inclusive frameworks that center human security over strategic advantage. This review conference should reinvigorate the zone process, not as a side agenda item, but as a central test of whether the NPT's disarmament commitments can be made real. If there was ever a moment for this kind of ambitious integrated diplomacy, it is now, when the Middle East is living through one of its most devastating periods in a generation, because as we see, the cost of continued inaction is not merely stalemate, it is escalation. Which brings me to Article 6 and the need to be direct about what this treaty actually requires. The NPT disarmament obligations are binding legal commitments, as has been already mentioned, and the states that bear the greatest responsibilities under Article 6 are the same states whose current security doctrines treat nuclear weapons not as a last resort, but as an active instrument of strategic posture. That is a contradiction that this review conference cannot continue to ignore. Progress, again, has not merely stalled in this sense. In many dimensions, it has reversed. And the question that needs to be asked openly here is whether security doctrines built on permanent nuclear reliance are compatible with obligations these states have already accepted. Not as a methodological challenge, but as a legal and political one that demands an answer. And what this conference can do is create real pressure for that answer. For example, by giving the Middle East weapons of mass destruction-free zone the political momentum it has long been promised by investing in diplomatic processes that reduce tension and rebuild trust among nuclear armed states, and by expanding civil society participation so that accountability is grounded in lived realities and not just managed from a distance through the same technical language that has insulated these decisions for decades. And I'm going to close by saying that nuclear weapons are many times described as the ultimate guarantee of security. And I want to say, actually, they are the ultimate measure of our collective failure to build peace. Moving beyond deterrence, it's gonna be hard. It means confronting entrenched interests, questioning long-standing assumptions, and committing to political processes that are really slow, uncertain, and honestly unglamorous. But the alternative, a world permanently organized around the threat of nuclear annihilation, is not stability. It is a slow-motion catastrophe. The work of peacebuilding is not separate from nuclear risk reduction because, as we can see, initiatives like the Middle East WMD free zone, even where progress has been painfully slow, demonstrate that pathways exist. And what is missing is not the roadmap, it's the political will. And the review conference can supply some of that will, and we are urging it to do so. So thank you. I'm going to close with that.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for your excellent remarks. I think it's really important to hear from a civil society perspective, especially the peace-building efforts that you are doing right now. Unfortunately, the representative from UNODA can't make it today. He had a last-minute obligation, but we are really happy to have our next speaker, Shu Zhu. Shu is a second-year PhD student in the Atmospheric Sciences graduate program at Rutgers University. He earned his bachelor's degree in meteorology from the University of Science and Technology of China. His research examines how climate change affects terrestrial vegetation and human health, with a focus on stratospheric aerosol climate intervention and nuclear war scenarios. So, Shu, the floor is yours. Can everybody see the slides?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Shu. I'm from Rutgers University, and I'm working with Dr. Elisha and Dr. Anton Wen on nuclear winter. And today I'm going to discuss the global famine after the nuclear war. This is our beautiful planet. The picture is taken by Apollo 10 in 1969 during its journey to the moon. If you look closely at this picture, in the center you will find here is Mexico. Here is the coast of California. And the most parts of the United States is covered by the clouds. The clouds are great, right? They can bring us rainfall just as we had last night. The rainfall raises the crops and feed the population. However, the nuclear bombs will destroy everything, as they did 81 years ago. This is the drawing made by a Japanese child who survived the bombing in Hiroshima. As you can see, the nuclear bursts will burn the cities, and a huge firestorms will be created. In the meantime, the burning of the cities and burning of the houses and everything will create a massive volume of smoke. The smoke will be released into the mid layer of the atmosphere, the layer we call the stratosphere. The black carbon, or known as soot, is part of the smoke being released. And this is a really fast process. If we have a war between the United States and Russia, and only 1 week after the explosion, the soot will spread out throughout the entire northern hemisphere. So if unfortunately Apollo 10 take a picture once again from outer space, this is what our Earth might look like. Only 2 weeks after the explosion, the soot will cover the entire Earth. The soot, known as the black carbon, since they are black, so they can absorb the sunlight in the mid layer of atmosphere. The more sunlight being absorbed there means that we don't have as much sunlight coming to our surface. The surface sunlight can raise the surface temperature, and the less sunlight coming to the surface means that the surface temperature will be decreasing. In the meantime, the more sunlight being absorbed in the mid layer of atmosphere, the stratosphere will be heated. You know what? In that layer, we also have the ozone. The reaction of ozone is really sensitive to the temperature. The warming of the stratosphere will make these reactions much faster than before, means that more ozone are going to be reacted. So after the soot are precipitated out and sunlight can come in again, once again to the surface, the UV, more UV will be able to come through this stratosphere because the ozone can protect. Right now, the ozone can protect. Yes, the ozone can protect us from the UV. So if the ozone is gone, we will suffer from the extra UV. And if we once again look at our planet from the surface, from where we are standing, the condition will be cold, dry, and dark. We will have more UV, the crops will be dying, and there will be a lot of people around the world do not have enough food to eat. And we call this situation the nuclear winter. For us climate modelers, we try to estimate the different intensities of the nuclear war by using the different suit injection scenarios. The suit known as the black carbon. So let's take the war between India and Pakistan, for example. Let's say if the two countries uses 250 nuclear heads to attack the urban centers in each country, and depending on the yield, the suit being released can be ranging from 16 TG to 37 TG. TG is the unit, which is also as the million tons. And the direct facilities by the nuclear heads will be ranging from 52 million to 127 million. If there is a bigger war between the United States and Russia, there will be 150 TG of suit being released, and the direct facility will be about 360 million. So these are really big numbers. However, by the estimation of atmospheric scientists, we found that actually far more people are going to be killed in regions that are far removed from the targets because of the climate change that is unprecedented in the human history. Based on the simulation published by the Owen in 2019 in Science, they use the whole atmospheric humidity climate model version 4. We call it vacuum 4. So this is his result. This is their results. And if you look at the blue curve here, this is the smallest nuclear war between the India and Pakistan, which released 5 TG of soot. The temperature reduction will be about 1 degree 3 years after the explosion. And if you go all the way down to the green curve, biggest nuclear war between US and Russia, the temperature reduction will be more than 11 degrees by the end of year 3. In comparison, in our human history, we had a little ice age 400 years ago. At that time, the global cooling is only 1 degree. Even compared with the ice age 21,000 years ago, the temperature reduction is about 5 degrees. As you may notice, both of these two temperature reduction is far less than a nuclear winter if there is a nuclear war between the US and Russia. And that is why we call the climate change is unprecedented in human history if we have a nuclear winter. The temperature reduction will be devastating to the global food security. The paper published by the Gravity Shots Group in 2022 on Nature Food calculated the global famine under the different nuclear war suit injection scenarios. This is the 33 TG suit injection, the war between India and Pakistan, and you can find that in the entire Northern Hemisphere, in many countries, that a lot of people will not have enough food. In Canada and in the Northern Europe, that's more than 95%. In Russia, that's more than 75%. China, more than a half. In the United States and Mexico, more than a quarter. And this situation will become worse if there is a war between US and Russia. This is the 150 suit injection scenario, and if you look at the map, you can find that the brown color almost covers the entire Northern Hemisphere. That is to say, the entire Northern Hemisphere will suffer from a very severe global famine. By their estimation, the war between India and Pakistan could kill 1 billion to 2 billion people. The war between US and Russia could kill more than 5 billion people. That is, the numbers are far larger than numbers created directly by the nuclear weapons attack. And remember, this study uses 2013 Food and Agriculture Organization data, where the global population was only 7 billion people. So if we use this more than 5 billion to the 3 billion ratio, that is to say, the war between US and Russia could kill most of the Earth's population if there is a nuclear war happening today. As Beatrice Finn said during her presentation, in the Nobel Peace Prize lecture in December 10, 2017, the story of nuclear weapons will have an ending, and it is up to us whether the ending will be. Will it be the end of nuclear weapons, or will it be the end of us? One of the things will happen. The only rational path is to cease living under the conditions where our mutual distractions is only one impulsive tension away. So let's listen to the experts and scientists and learn from what they say. Thank you.
Wow, that was an amazing creative presentation. Thank you so much, Shu. I think that it's so important to understand the science and to work with scientists. And I also want to say that Shu has worked closely with Dr. Alan Robach, who has been bringing in groundbreaking research and knowledge on nuclear winter and all the things that Shu has also mentioned today. So I want to thank you so much for that. I think it's so important for us to understand. So that also brings us to the end of our program of speakers. And now would be a good time to open up the floor for any questions for our speakers today. Yes.
Well, just directly to the last speaker. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Absolutely brilliant. I remember way back in 2006 giving a similar presentation, not actually in this room, it would have been nice if it had been, but in the next room, in conference room C. To a room full of diplomats. The air conditioning had ceased to function, and there were 80 people in the room at the time. And they stopped fiddling with their mobiles and their laptops, and there was dead silence, and they looked at what we had to say. And as the black stuff from the northern hemisphere, we had an actual movie of it, which I think we pinched from Alan Robach's website. As the black stuff covered the southernmost tip of Patagonia, an audible sigh went around the room. So thank you for recreating that experience. It was wonderful. Well, wonderful, but like chilling.
Thank you. And your name again, an organization?
Oh, John Allen. I'm the nuclear risk reduction guy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
George Anthony of Pathways to Peace. I'm here with my students because I want them to have a strong understanding that it's going to be their turn to sort of take up this torch and move this message forward. But thank you, speakers, because way back, Professor Anton talked about, he was first to talk about nuclear weapons not localized. I can remember back in the 70s, I believe, there was a film called Threads. I'm sure some of us are familiar with it. If you're not familiar with the film Threads, but they really sort of addressed this because Caspar Weinberger at the time actually made a comment. Caspar Weinberger was our Secretary of Defense. He said it is his belief that we can win a limited nuclear war. When he made that comment, I'm not sure the producer of Threads, but he had to make this film to show the world what a limited nuclear war would look like. And what it would look like is specifically what we heard today. The film portrayed a nuclear winter. The film portrayed the entire electrical and energy grid being made obsolete and the world moving back towards the Middle Ages. The film showed a nuclear winter where a year went where the temperature never went above 35 degrees in the summer and basically minus 15 degrees in the winter. And the rain, the soot that came back was all full of radiation, which made our soil, again, also obsolete, filled with radioactive, and mankind had a very difficult time adjusting to that type of environment. That film started what was called the Green Revolution and the No Nukes movement, where people were literally rioting in the streets in Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, because of what they saw. They left the movie theaters in anger. That film was not shown in this country. It was eventually shown on PBS at 11 p.m. under strong parental guidance and supervision. I think what this country needs, what this world needs, is maybe a Threats 2.0, just to sort of light a match underneath people. How important this message is that we have to sort of become a world sort of in agreement, because Professor has said to us that we have failed in that effort to sort of create a world of peace. We sort of, many of these countries use the weapons as deterrents, but also it's a very strong political and economic angle as well. So I just wanted to bring that in. And thank you for this wonderful presentation today. It's extremely timely in such a difficult time.
Thank you, George.
My name
Yes.
is Mariana. I am the part of the delegation for humanitarian and non-proliferation disarmament. I also wanted to thank all the speakers, but also the question to the last of our delegate. So, from your experience, do you find that the research that you are doing is internationally supported? Do you think that enough of the societies is interested in this? You have enough funding? If you could give us some more of the insight. For me personally, it's very interesting that you're coming from China, a country which is now strongly saying about the support to the NPT, as we can see in the statements. Though I was not familiar with research done explicitly about the environmental consequences, if you could give some more insight, bringing your international, maybe Chinese perspective, as far as I feel comfortable with your head.
Thank you. Was a long question, and so I'm starting Nuclear Winter right now. So my project is funded by the Future of Life Institute. I think it's a private institute in the United States. So which means that there are some people that in the United States who cares about the consequences of nuclear winter. That's great. But right now there's a fund cat, not in our aspect, they're in the entire science aspect. So it's a difficult time for the scientists. So you don't have enough the funding to do the research right now. So that we don't know if things will get better in the future. And regarding to China, so I'm not sure if you remember there's once a vote just several months ago in the UN to vote if there's really need to start on the nuclear winter. And there's a vote in the United Nations, and the China voted yes. And so I believe the Chinese government is willing to fund the research on nuclear winter. But right now, I think there's no groups in China are actually doing this research. But there's a similar research also funded by Chinese government, which is called the geoengineering. They use the same kind of climate mechanisms, which is black carbon, but the people do it it is controlled by our human, and we control the amount of CO2 being released and control the temperature reduction by ourselves. So that is kind of a way to eliminate the global warming. And Chinese government and US government are really interested in this topic. So they're kind of doing the research on that. But yes, that probably like the government is more concerned about the future. That is the.
Just to add to this answer and about the processes to highlight the humanitarian consequences of, or the consequences in general of a nuclear war. I mentioned this process mandated by the General Assembly. There is now this independent scientific panel on the effects of a nuclear war, and we believe it is actually really the one process that would then allow for yet another discussion at the General Assembly about the humanitarian consequences. There is an annual resolution introduced by Austria and a lot of other countries to the disarmament committee of the General Assembly, but this is a text that is negotiated by the member states, whereas this report or the study it is written by scientists, and it will update the findings of a much older study from the 1980s. And what we believe it's going to be very telling and interesting is that sure, it would look into these climate effects and all the effects on food security that are broadly studied and have been partly already known in the 1980s. But what we did also look into is the cascading effects on actually global economies. So if you take one localized conflict like the one in the Middle East around the Strait of Hormuz, you see already how this is shaking global economy. What the study will include are information about how you would see global economy collapsing actually because of a nuclear conflict. And that will probably then add to the argument that these weapons are not a sustainable way to create what certain countries refer to as global strategic stability, because it's actually creating the risk of very quickly everything becoming very unstable. And because you spoke about the movies, I think one has to add to that pivotal cineastic moments the day after, which from the 1980s, which I think, especially in the US, also created more attention to the topic of actually the nuclear disarmament between Russia, Soviet Union, and the United States is something that the citizens were holding the government accountable here.
Thank you. Did you want to?
No.
Yes.
Alan, we're also from Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. A follow-up question with regards to the climatic impact of nuclear weapons, but also looking at the impact on the climate from carbon emissions or greenhouse gases. And wondering if there can be sort of some capacity to build awareness and policy change by conjoining the two advisory opinions that address these issues. So they are 1996 with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on the illegality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons, and in that the court affirmed that the destructive impact of nuclear weapons cannot be contained in space nor time. That includes radiation and climate impact of nuclear weapons. And then just last year, we had the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on the obligations of states with regard to climate change, which is laid down for a lot of obligations in states. So here we have like two legal opinions, from the highest court in the world that are relating to climate change and nuclear weapons. Can you see some ways that those two cases could actually be used to amplify the change in policy on both issues? Because these are both existential threats to humanity, climate change and nuclear weapons.
That's a quick question. And I'm not sure if you may remember the slides I showed about the temperature decrease. We can find the temperature after the 3 years of decrease, that's a huge decrease, and then it goes back very fast. And after 15 years of after the explosion, the temperature effect will disappear. That, as I mentioned, the suit will make the ozone reduction even faster, which means that there will be a UV effect after the temperature goes back. And but right now we don't have much research done on the UV impacts on everything, on the ecosystems, on the human health, and on the marine, on the fishery, on everything. We're just doing this research. And that is why before that the government is more focused on the short-term effects. And they may say, okay, the temperature is not a worry about, don't need to worry about because it's a short-term effect, but it's actually not. And there are far more long-lasting effects from what I'm learning right now. I'm studying the UV impacts on human health. And actually, the UV effects on our human health will last for about 1 century. So that is a really long-lasting effect. And but we are starting doing this research, and probably in the next a few years, people will know that okay, the nuclear winter has a very long-lasting effect. It's not just something happening in a few years after the bombing. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Not really. I was asking about whether the legal pronouncements from the International Court of Justice on nuclear weapons from '96 and climate change last year can actually sort of brought together in order to build cooperation between nuclear disarmament movements, which are small, and climate-active movements, which are much larger, in order to have success on both fronts?
I think I can chime in on that. I think that those are, of course, really important decisions that were made in the International Court of Justice. There is constantly a detachment or lack of connection between the nuclear disarmament and the climate movements. And I think that civil society needs to add more pressure and raise awareness in connecting those movements together. And of course, utilizing the decisions that were made by the Court of Justice to help make that connection.
I can maybe add, because for the last 3 years I was following climate negotiations, and now only in December I changed the file, so I'm pretty new also to the Austrian disarmament department. But I was at the climate conferences in Dubai, and then in Baku, and then in Belém, and I think I'm always surprised that actually at the COPs you have 2 weeks of intense negotiations, and at the end you have an outcome document that is adopted by consensus, whereas at the NPT Review Conferences it seems not to be possible, although we are here for 4 weeks. And you know, there are maybe there are, it's complex, but there could be some parallels drawn and maybe some lessons learned. I mean, you have at the climate conferences, you have ministers coming for the last week, and then you really have the political weight there, and you know, you have also a host country, so the host country doesn't want to end the conference without an outcome document, without a result. So I mean, it would definitely, from our perspective, be important that the review conferences, this review conference, ends with a meaningful outcome. And about the advisory opinion, so it is equally, I think, difficult to anchor the reference to the advisory opinion about the nuclear legality of nuclear weapons and the advisory opinion on climate change into the outcome documents of a multilateral body that needs to agree by consensus. And that is obviously something that the Austrian delegation and many like-minded would, you know, advocate for, but then we are faced with the fact that this is not sometimes agreeable to everyone. So I think it's our job to find, you know, a creative way around it and to have these references. But I hope that was partly an answer to your question. I mean, it's definitely something where we don't only see the scientific input, but actually also the weight of an international legal opinion to you know, change the discourse and push for, you know, more acknowledgement on the humanitarian consequences. I mean, even humanitarian consequences per se are a challenged and controversial topic for the review conference outcome document. We have received the zero draft yesterday evening. There are first discussions starting, and we know that there will be some delegations who would, you know, prefer to see the focus of this text being somewhere else than, for instance, on humanitarian consequences. Yeah.
Thank you, Anton. And if I can just add, I think that you mentioned the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. I think that is one of the bridges that can help bring the movements together, the climate movement and the nuclear disarmament movement. Because when we start to understand how it impacts humans on a health level, on a personal level, on a community level, I think people start to understand and see the connection. Any other questions? Okay. So I want to thank everybody who has come here today for our side event. You can connect with us at Pathways to Peace at pathwaystopeace.com/program/nuclear-disarmament. And you can always connect with any of our speakers here. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming today.